Hi everyone, today I'm going to be doing a video on the top 10 reasons why being a long-term gamer sucks. If you don't know me, my name's Delilah, aka ASSASSINA. Welcome back to my channel. I've been gaming for about 35 years and so much has changed, not just in the industry, technology, or the games themselves, but also how I've changed as a lover of video games. These 10 reasons why being a long-term gamer sucks is an opinion, but also it's going to touch on some recommendations that I think might help the industry scale back on things so that it can have a healthier ecosystem for consumers and developers. But I'm not a developer, so like, who am I? Now, I definitely can't speak for every single long-term gamer, but I do think that many would align with at least some of the things on this list. So if you're a long-term gamer, let me know if you agree or disagree. This will definitely come across as like a geriatric back in my day kind of rant, so definitely listen at your own discretion. My number one reason is going to be the crux of many of the issues that I bring up in the remainder of this list, which is that we feel there are too many games. Specifically, too many games releasing per year and in very close proximity to each other. This kind of leads to an overshadowing of good titles like Horizon. Oh my god. An oversaturation of games that seem too similar to one another, lack of polish in new titles due to forced deadlines from publishers, an ever-growing backlog for gamers, and more importantly, a lack of long-standing communal celebration of single titles. Now, I know a lot of titles have had monumental influence, perhaps unprecedented monumental influence. And what I mean by monumental influence is like communities coming together to share experiences that they have in the game. Now, I know some recent titles like Elden Ring or Breath of the Wild had this influence, but I even think that those games would have had a stronger staying power if gamers didn't have other games to move on to. I mean, do you remember the amount of discovery and conversations we had around games like Skyrim or Shadow of the Colossus even? I miss being able to have virtually everyone playing the same game to its completion and sharing their experiences because it was one of the few games out and we didn't have the next hot thing around the corner to prepare for. Now we're playing a game and we're getting trailers for like 5 other games and it just kind of takes away from the excitement of the game that we're playing in that moment sometimes because then we're thinking of the future rather than the moment. Back in the day, a game that became a cultural phenomenon didn't die in like a month or two. It was something that was discussed perhaps for the entire year. And I'm not saying I want one game released per year, that's insane, but also not like 100 games per day, please. In a nutshell, many of us long-term gamers feel overwhelmed because we grew up in a time where a nice handful of releases came out per year. And that allowed us to enjoy games to completion without having to worry about 5 other cool games that came out in the same week. Oh, we used to get summers to actually enjoy the outdoors or play catch up on our backlogs. Because, you know, summers used to be a gaming drought. There were barely any releases around the summer. I know I said I don't want like one game per year to release, but truthfully, if no games release for an entire year, I'd probably be content with playing games on my backlog or even replaying some classics that I've been wanting to go back to. Number 2 is kind of related to number 1, and that's that we feel like games have too much padding and are generally way too long. Too often, games have a list of menial tasks to complete that have little to no relevance to the story or the lore, and if it does, it's usually doing the same boring task 50 times with minimal variety. And don't get me wrong, I'm a completionist at heart, so passing by side quests or extra activities without completing them really pains me. But then I smartened up and I got older and I reflected on my values and how my time is being spent. And I realized how redundant a lot of games are. And I knew I had to stop. I wouldn't mind the Ubisoft-style checkmark open world games if they offered like a new angle to gorgeous environments like Ghost of Tsushima did, or even Uncharted, which wasn't really open world, but it had open spaces. Or if they did some environmental storytelling like The Last of Us, or perhaps brought us to a secret enemy encounter like they do in Elden Ring. Nowadays, most games just have extra stuff for the sake of having extra stuff to do to keep gamers playing that game for a longer time. But it has absolutely no substance in my opinion. Honestly, I have a checklist of enough things to do in my real life. I mean, frankly, I don't have time for tedious bullshit. I'm even recording this in my work clothes because my lunch break is the only time I get to make content, really. I honestly even found it difficult to enjoy a game that was my most anticipated game of this year, 2024, which is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because it had just so much shit in it that was either not fun or irrelevant. This really messes with the pacing and the pattern padding of video games, and I don't know why so many developers do this. Playing recent remakes like Dead Space and Resident Evil 4 made me miss how perfect the pacing was of older games, especially the ones that released around 2008. I just hope that more games somehow reconnect with those more concise gaming sensibilities. And EA, please allow Motive to remake Dead Space 2. Please, like, we need more games like that. Why number 2 is such an issue is because of number 3 reason why being a long-term gamer kind of sucks. And that's that games lack innovation and feel like a waste of time. We feel a strong fatigue for the same type of games, and we notice that many companies are following trends rather than creative vision. Some examples include live service games, open world checkmark games thanks largely to Ubisoft, even highly cinematic over-the-shoulder games typically developed by first-party PlayStation studios have lost their luster in recent years. This is a problem because it's getting more and more difficult to tell games apart or even appreciate their creative vision without comparing it to something else. I don't mind seeing familiar mechanics or styles to games. I do appreciate inspiration, but it gets to the point where games start to look the same, and this causes any excitement to diminish when a new game is premiered. So number 3 basically leads to my number 4, which is that the lack of innovation in games makes genres and subgenres have no real meaning to us anymore. Like, what is a Souls-like? It's literally used to describe any game that's mildly punishing. Even Metroidvania has just been boiled down to any game that has a backtracking mechanic. Even RPGs and action-adventure games don't have an identity anymore. I mean, look at games like God of War and Horizon Zero Dawn. They're basically action-adventure games with RPG mechanics. And then you have games like Final Fantasy 16 that are basically wannabe RPG games, but it should just be an action-adventure game instead of shoehorning in these RPG mechanics that are useless. Don't get me wrong, I love genre bending. I mean, some games do this really well, like Nier Automata, for example. It had an amazing combination of hack and slash and bullet hell combat. It just feels like generally genres or categories of games for the most part are starting to feel more and more useless. And I mean, this definitely shows up in like the Keighley Game Awards event. Like Sifu is a fighting game. Okay, and due to my point in number 3 and number 4 leads me to number 5, which is that many games look the same and lack identity. It's so difficult for us to get excited for new games being premiered at video game conferences. Part of this is because trailers just don't have enough details to understand what type of game is being showcased, and most conferences are just littered with ads, so it's kind of hard to look forward to anything anymore. I used to get so excited over these conferences. It was kind of like a gaming holiday. And I know the death of E3 makes sense because of like COVID and money. You know, doing a developer conference digitally is probably more affordable than like paying all this money to be present at an event where people get hands-on with your game. But at least E3 used to feel like a gaming holiday. And I do think that Jeff Keighley is trying his best to keep Summer of Gaming holiday alive. But again, these events are littered with ads, and many of the games being showcased don't appear to have an identity. They'll show like, I don't know, a cheeseburger and like have a noise and then game title, and it's like, what the fuck did I just see? It's like what game trailers are showing nowadays isn't like a story to get involved in or combat to really enjoy. They don't even show gameplay most of the time. Now they just kind of show like a vibe. Number 6 might be a personal problem because I have the memory of a fish, but it's that it's difficult for us to remember any key moments in games because we haven't played said game in a long time, or because all of these games are kind of melding into our deteriorating brains. It gets a little annoying when people who just recently played a game for the first time remember all the finite details and kind of make us feel stupid for forgetting some things. Like, bitch, I played that game when you were like a sperm in your daddy's ballsack. Chill. How could you even expect us to remember? It's just too much. It's all too much. And trust me, we want to revisit classics and have it fresh in our mind like you do, but not only is our brain matter rapidly deteriorating, but we just play so many games at this point that it's difficult to remember most of it. But again, maybe that's a personal problem. And don't get me wrong, there are some moments in games that I will never forget, like in BioShock, the thank you kindly moment, or the Psycho Mantis fight in Metal Gear Solid, or the really like vague ending in Shadow of the Colossus, or more recently, The Last of Us ending and how that created so much good conversation. Like, it's not that we don't remember anything. Obviously, we remember, I think, important, very memorable moments in video games, but it's just, it's hard to retain all this information, man. It's so many years of information, and we getting old, like fucking early onset of dementia, maybe? All right, number 7 is that we can't stand microtransactions, but we've become apathetic. It's because we grew up in a day and age where you bought a game for one price, you unlocked hidden content by doing what? Playing the game. However, it's been such a long time that microtransactions have been implemented into video games, so now we just kind of don't bother with them. There's just something so much cooler and satisfying about playing a game and doing specific objectives and unlocking things that way rather than paying. But publishers and developers like money, so this is going to be part of our ecosystem because money. We can thank free-to-play games for that because it makes this practice a little bit more acceptable. They have to pay for their game somehow, right? I think most of us long-term gamers would rather pay one price for a game and call it a day. And we also feel like microtransactions are predatory, but thankfully I personally haven't given in and I just ignore them, and I've been fine with that. Number 8 is that we fear subscription services. All right, fear is a little bit of a strong word, but we don't think it's gonna work as well as maybe Game Pass is presenting itself right now. You gotta understand something. The death of Blockbuster had a major impact on how we consume movies. Like, we missed that shit. It was like a weekend event to just go to Blockbuster with your friends, pick out a few movies, get some popcorn and candy, maybe even some games, and just call it a weekend. And sure, services like Game Pass or Netflix make things convenient and affordable so that you have a handful of games and movies available, but they're also kind of a trap. A trap to pay for a service that you don't even use all of the time. For example, Game Pass has a lot of games available, some of them even day and date, meaning you get them available when they release, which is great. But you're probably going to play a bunch of other games that aren't on that service, thus making it only useful about half the time. And then PlayStation has like a weird tier subscription service that barely seems valuable and is very confusing. And I'm definitely aware that this isn't just a trap for video games, but all kinds of subscription services for movies and memberships and music applications. I just think that most of us long-term gamers kind of prefer that we pay for the games that we want to play rather than a subscription service. Because with the subscription service, we're basically paying for the convenience and for a variety of games that we're probably never gonna play. Or if we want to play it, then it's off the service by the time we do. And to be honest, I don't even think that the subscription model is sustainable for many developers, but again, what do I know? Number 9 is that gaming becoming more popular has put the industry in a tumultuous position. Now, I don't work in the industry, so it really doesn't affect me other than I'm a fan, and just that I care about people and jobs and the overall health of the video game ecosystem. It's not something that keeps me up at night, but it's definitely something that comes to mind as someone who's played video games for a very long time. There's more games than ever, and even more people playing games than there ever was. And it's cool in a way because the stigma behind gamers being basement dweller nerdy dudes has kind of diminished and is now an actually socially acceptable hobby for everyone. So these are all good things. Why am I talking about it in a list where I'm basically bitching? This is because as games have become more popular, more money-hungry people and practices have infected the video game industry. Publishers went from imposing crunch when the COVID-19 pandemic started and gaming was booming due to quarantine because people had like nothing else to do but play games and be home. And now they're just straight up laying everyone off. Even gaming journalism has kind of failed because it's becoming an SEO chase and dual relationships have become more criticized. And then celebrities that never even gave a shit about video games are suddenly given more time to make speeches on stages at video game conferences than actual developers earning rewards. It's bullshit. While I'm glad that I no longer have to keep my gaming hobby a secret like I did during my childhood and teen years, I'm still frustrated that the industry has become kind of gross. Number 10 is that our posture is absolutely fucked.